They marched in under the burning sun, rifles ready, boots steady, orders clear. And then, within moments, they were gone. Not defeated in a visible clash, not captured in any official record, not even found, at least not in the way history expects. Over a century later, what happened to those men during the Battle of Gallipoli still refuses to be fully explained, because this isn't just a story about war, it's a story about disappearance. To understand the mystery, you have to understand the chaos. Why mid-1915, the Gallipoli campaign had already turned into a disaster. What was supposed to be a decisive Allied victory against the Ottoman Empire had become a grinding stalemate. Heat, disease, poor planning, and relentless resistance had drained morale. The beaches of Gallipoli weren't just battlefields. They were traps. British, Australian, and New Zealand forces found themselves pinned down, unable to advance, unable to retreat without heavy losses. Every hill was defended, every movement observed, and yet commanders still believed a breakthrough was possible. Suvla Bay would be the answer. In August 1915, a new offensive began. Fresh troops were landed at Suvla Bay, tasked with pushing inland and capturing high ground that would finally break the deadlock. Among these troops was the 1/5th Battalion of the Royal Norfolk Regiment. These weren't inexperienced soldiers, they were trained, organized, prepared. Their objective seemed straightforward: advance into lightly defended territory and secure control. But war has a way of turning simple into impossible. Witnesses would later describe the moment with eerie consistency. The battalion moved forward across open ground, heading toward a wooded area. There was no immediate sign of heavy resistance, no obvious danger. Then came the detail that would define the mystery forever: not a cloud. Low, dense, unmoving, not drifting like fog, not thinning in the heat. Just there. Some accounts, particularly from New Zealand engineers stationed nearby, claimed the soldiers marched directly into it, one after another, disappearing from sight. And then, nothing. No sound of battle, and retreat, and survivors returning. Just silence. The cloud is the most controversial element of the story, and the reason it refuses to fade into ordinary history. According to testimony, it behaved unlike any natural phenomenon. It didn't move with the wind. It didn't dissipate under the sun. It seemed almost solid. Some witnesses claimed that after the last soldier entered, the cloud slowly lifted upward and vanished into the sky, taking the entire unit with it. Now pause for a moment, because even in the chaos of war, this detail stands out as something deeply unsettling. Was it misinterpretation or something genuinely unexplained? After the war, British officials attempted to reconstruct events. The conclusion? The battalion had advanced too far, become isolated, and was overwhelmed by Ottoman forces. A tragic, but common, wartime outcome. Years later, remains believed to belong to the missing soldiers were reportedly discovered in scattered locations. Case closed? Not quite, because the evidence didn't fully align. The number of bodies didn't match the number of missing men. The locations were inconsistent with the supposed battle. And perhaps most troubling, Ottoman records didn't clearly confirm a direct engagement with that specific unit. It was as if the official explanation filled the gaps without truly solving the mystery. Let's start with the most grounded explanation. The battalion advanced in a difficult terrain, lost coordination, and encountered hidden enemy positions. Without support, they were cut down quickly. Bodies could have been buried, scattered, or lost over time. War's messy. Records are incomplete. From a historian's perspective, this is the most likely scenario, but it doesn't explain everything. And in mysteries like this, the unanswered details are where the story lives. Another possibility is that the cloud was real, but natural. Dense ground fog, combined with heat and dust, could create unusual visual effects. Under stress, witnesses might interpret what they see in ways that feel extraordinary. The soldiers hit fog. Visibility drops. Chaos follows. Later, memory fills in the gaps. But here's the problem. Multiple witnesses described the same strange behavior. Not just fog, but something that didn't act like fog. Could the battalion have been captured? In theory, yes. But large groups of prisoners usually leave traces, records, testimonies, exchanges that in this case, there's little to support that outcome. And again, it doesn't address the strange visual accounts. Skeptics believe the mystery has been exaggerated. What began as a tragic military failure may have evolved into a legend. Stories get retold. Details become dramatic. Memory reshapes reality. The cloud becomes more mysterious with each retelling. This explanation is compelling, but relies on one assumption, that every unusual detail is simply human error, and not everyone is convinced. This is where history meets the unknown. Some believe the battalion encountered something beyond conventional understanding, an atmospheric anomaly, a rare natural phenomenon not yet fully understood, or something even stranger, that a distortion, that a portal, an event that science still cannot explain. There is no proof, but there's also no complete explanation that fully closes the case. And that uncertainty keeps the theory alive. Most wartime mysteries fade. This one didn't. Why? Because it sits at the edge of explanation. There's just enough evidence to suggest something unusual happened, but not enough to prove what it's a gap in history, and gaps invite questions. Long after the guns of the Battle of Gallipoli fell silent, investigators began digging, not into the ground, but into paperwork, war diaries, field reports, survivor testimonies, intelligence summaries, and that's where things became even more unsettling. Because instead of clarity, the documents revealed contradictions. Some reports suggested the 1/5 Battalion advanced too far and became lost in action. Others vaguely referenced heavy resistance, but without precise coordinates, timelines, or confirmed enemy engagement. Even more curious, certain details seemed missing, pages incomplete, accounts inconsistent, names listed without explanation. Now, to be fair, this wasn't unusual in World War I. Record-keeping was chaotic, especially in campaigns as poorly managed as Gallipoli. But in this case, the gaps weren't just administrative. They were narrative that IT felt less like a story that had been recorded poorly and more like a story that had never been fully seen. If the battalion had been destroyed in combat, there should have been confirmation from the other side, the Ottoman forces. After all, defeating an entire British unit would have been a significant tactical moment, something worth documenting, even celebrating. But when historians examined Ottoman archives, they found something unexpected: silence. There were records of fighting in the region, yes, accounts of clashes, casualties, shifting lines, but no clear, direct report of an engagement that matched the disappearance of the Norfolk Battalion, an omission of capturing hundreds of soldiers, and a detailed account of wiping out a full advancing unit in that exact area. It was as if the battalion had slipped through the cracks, not just in British history, but in Ottoman records as well. And that raised a chilling possibility. What if no one actually saw what happened? To understand how a unit could disappear, you have to look at the land itself. Gallipoli wasn't a flat battlefield. It was a maze. Sharp ridges, deep gullies, thick scrub that limited visibility to just a few meters in places, dry riverbeds that twisted unpredictably through the landscape. From a distance, everything looked open. Up close, it was disorienting. Units could lose formation within minutes. Officers could lose sight of their own men. Communication could collapse instantly. Now, imagine advancing into that terrain under heat, under pressure, under uncertainty. It's entirely possible that the battalion fragmented, split into smaller groups that were then overwhelmed one by one. But again, that explains how they could be defeated, not how they could vanish so completely from consistent record. Let's return to the most controversial element, the cloud. Because whether it was real or misinterpreted, it played a crucial role in shaping the mystery. Human perception, especially in war, is not reliable. Fatigue distorts vision. Fear amplifies the unusual. The brain fills in gaps with patterns that feel real in the moment, that a patch of fog becomes something solid, a shadow becomes movement, that a moment becomes a memory that evolves over time. Some historians argue that the New Zealand witnesses genuinely believed what they saw, but what they saw wasn't what they thought. It was a low-lying cloud, illuminated by harsh sunlight, could appear strangely defined. If the wind dropped suddenly, it might even seem stationary. And if soldiers entered that fog and never reappeared, the mind would search for an explanation, even if it had to create one. Here's something important to understand. War doesn't just produce history, it produces stories. And some stories grow larger than the events themselves. The disappearance of the Norfolk Battalion became one of those stories. Not because it was the only unexplained loss, but because it touched something deeper. The fear of the unknown that in most war narratives, there is closure, victory or defeat, survival or death. But here, there was only absence, and absence invites imagination. Over time, retellings added tension, mystery, and drama. The cloud became stranger, the disappearance more absolute, until the story crossed a line from historical anomaly into legend. Decades after the war, reports emerged that remains believed to belong to the missing battalion had been found, scattered across farmland near the original area of advance. At first glance, this seemed like the answer. They had been there all along, lost, overlooked, forgotten by the chaos of war. But once again, the details didn't fully align. The number of remains was incomplete. The distribution suggested disorder, not a single decisive engagement. Some reports even claimed the bodies showed signs of falling from height, though this detail remains controversial and unverified. Instead of closing the mystery, the discovery reopened it, because now the question wasn't just, where did they go? It became, what actually happened to them in those final moments? At its core, this mystery sits at a crossroads. On one side, logic, evidence, and historical analysis. On the other, uncertainty, perception, and the limits of explanation. Most historians lean toward grounded answers, fragmentation, ambush, miscommunication. And they're probably right, but probably is not certainty. And in the absence of certainty, the door remains open, not necessarily to the supernatural, but to the possibility that something about this event has not yet been fully understood. Chapter 19. Why we still talk about it. There were countless tragedies in World War I. Millions of soldiers lost their lives in ways far more documented and far more brutal than why does this one story endure? Because it challenges expectations, because it refuses to fit neatly into known patterns, because it leaves space, just enough space, for doubt. And doubt is powerful. That IT keeps stories alive. When the war finally ended, the world tried to move on. Nations rebuilt. Borders shifted. Survivors returned home, carrying stories. Some heroic, some tragic, all marked by the weight of what they had seen. But not every story came back. Some were left behind, buried in the dust, scattered across battlefields, or lost somewhere between memory and silence. And among them, one absence remained louder than most. The disappearance of a battalion during the Battle of Gallipoli did not end when the war ended, because it never truly had an ending. Families waited first with hope, then with doubt, then with a quiet understanding that something was wrong, deeply, irreversibly wrong. Letters stopped coming. Names appeared on missing lists. Officials offered explanations, but not answers. And there's a difference in an explanation tries to close a story and an answer ends it. This story never ended. Imagine being one of those families, in grave to visit it, in final moment to hold on it, in clear truth to accept, just uncertainty. And uncertainty, over time, becomes its own kind of burden, because grief needs something solid, a place, a fact, a finality. But here, there was only a question. What happened? Years passed, then decades. Historians studied maps, compared records, retraced movements. Theories formed. Conclusions were suggested. Some believed the mystery had been solved, reduced to the brutal simplicity of war. Men advanced too far. Men were lost. Men died. That is an explanation that fits the logic of history. But logic doesn't always satisfy memory, because memory remembers the details that don't fit. The cloud that didn't move, the silence where there should have been gunfire, the absence of records where there should have been confirmation. Small fractures in the story, but enough to keep it from ever fully settling. And so the mystery remained, not as a headline, not as a confirmed anomaly, but as something quieter, that a story passed between generations, that a question revisited in documentaries, articles, late-night discussions, that a moment in history that refuses to become just another footnote, because it sits in that uncomfortable space between what we know and what we can't prove. Stand on that land today, and nothing feels unusual. The wind moves through the grass. The sky stretches wide and indifferent. The ground holds its secrets without resistance. There is no sign of what happened there, and no echo, no trace. And yet, the knowledge lingers that once in that exact place, something occurred that still doesn't fully make sense. Maybe the truth is simple. Maybe the battalion was lost in the most human way possible, through error, miscommunication, and the overwhelming chaos of war. That, if that's the case, then the mystery is not supernatural, it's tragic, that a reminder of how easily lives can disappear. Not into another world, but into the gaps of history itself. Or maybe there was a moment, a brief, unexplainable moment, where something unusual happened. Something that witnesses tried to describe, but never fully understood. Something that didn't leave enough evidence to be proven, but left enough impact to be remembered that we may never know, which is true. And perhaps that's why this story still matters. Because in a world where we expect answers, where history is studied, documented, analyzed, this is one of the rare moments that resists completion, that IT reminds us that not everything can be fully reconstructed. Not every event can be explained. Not every disappearance can be resolved. In the end, what remains is not just the mystery, it's the absence. The empty space where certainty should be. The silence that followed those soldiers as they marched forward and never returned. And maybe that's the most haunting truth of all. Not that they vanished into something unknown, but that they vanished, and the world was never able to fully understand how. Because in a war defined by endings, this is the story that never found one.